Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the weirdest thing you've ever seen that you can't really explain? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
In a hospital, the nicer the patient, the worse the prognosis. If they work charities and are really polite, definitely aggressive cancer. If they're rude assholes who sell coke to children, they will live long, no matter how sick they are. I was hanging out on the sidewalk in front of a drugstore when some dude walked by, stopped, looked at me, and asked me to think of a card, any card. Then he said, "You're picturing the 5 of clubs." I was amazed. That's the card I was thinking of. Holy shit, that's right. I said, the dude just winked and walked away. That's the best magic trick I've ever seen. And it was some rando on the street that I never saw again. I have no clue how he did it, other than some form of subliminal planting of the image in my mind, but that's unreliable. It was a card trick that involved no cards at all. That was the most inexplicable thing I've ever seen. I once saw a clipboard fly off the hook it hung on and land around 3 feet away. The room was totally still beforehand, no breeze or earthquake or anything, just hanging up where it always was, then flung across the room for no reason at all. Most boring poltergeist ever. I was living in my last apartment back in the 90s. I walked down the hall, turned to go to the bathroom, and got hit in the back with a penny. Nobody else was in the apartment. My friends and I flashed a powerful light across a river and saw what appeared to be an absolutely massive boar. It then stood up on its hind legs, and it simply did not compute. Immediate fear for everyone ran. I was a kid, but I have a very good memory, and several friends that are positive they saw it as well. I don't know. Family was on holiday at a resort in Vietnam. My sister and I took an elevator in the hotel, and I stopped and opened up on the top floor, where nothing was built, just bricks laying about, a wheelbarrow, no fence or wall around the edge of the building, and there was a single small tree growing out of the ground in front of the elevator doors a few feet out. There was also this impenetrable fog that was floating around, obscuring the sight of what would be the rest of the resort below, and it was quite windy. We both agreed it was weird and looked dangerous to be up there. We clearly weren't meant to have access to the top floor since it wasn't fully constructed. We went back down to the ground floor and noticed that it was actually sunny and clear day all around. We wondered where the fog and wind went to, so we decided to go back to the unfinished rooftop level to check again, but when we did, it was perfectly fine and fully built. We couldn't explain it, and couldn't find that half-built top floor again afterwards. I posted something a long time ago, but I went from driving on one highway to another highway in pouring rain, still headed in the right direction, and about 10 miles in total displacement, but I consciously chose one, and was on it until I saw road signs telling me I was on the other. I just went numb. No loss of time or any other abnormality. If I didn't have to actually make a distinct effort to choose the route I wanted, I can see how it might have been a simple mistake. But I was on the road I chose, geography, etc., until I wasn't. Like something picked me up and put me down instantaneously, and I didn't notice until how long. Actually, one that was recently solved, thanks to the internet. We used to have parakeets in an outside aviary. One night I was woken up by the budgies screaming, and there was some odd animal attacking it. It had a pointed, cone-shaped head, no visible ears, and a long tail that was not fox-like. But it wasn't a possum. It was thin and moved like a cat. It jumped and moved lithely. I tapped on the sliding glass door and it stopped, cocked its head, and came over to look at me. We were looking eye to eye, and for the life of me, I still couldn't figure out a face. Now, I was really into nature in my area, really into reading books and shit because I wanted to be a forest ranger, and I still couldn't identify this animal. Everyone who I told said it was a bad dream, but it was real. Anyway, years later, it was still the weirdest thing that happened to me. The internet has come a long way, and I finally had my answer. I saw a fisher. It's a super rare animal in my area, like 500 left max. Kinda like a weasel, but heavier. They do have ears, by the way. I assume it was hidden by fur. When I was about 13 or 14 years old, myself and 2 friends found a house in the middle of the woods that just didn't make sense. We were all neighbors, and along all three of our houses was a very large wooded area. It runs a few miles back and becomes a state forest. We had run around these woods plenty of times, and even had areas we'd recognized as we went. This particular day, we followed this ravine that was sometimes a stream but was dry at this time. That part is important because we followed the same ravine several times after that and never could find the house again. When I say the house didn't make sense, I mean it. It was a white trailer, I'd say a double wide. There was white underpinning along the bottom. It was a poor country area, so that's not uncommon, but it was unusually clean, like brand new perfectly white. But that's still not the weird part. It didn't have doors, or windows, or a driveway. We were in the middle of the woods. The entire walk through the woods is full of bushes, thorns, spiderwebs, bugs, vines, logs, wood stuff. But this was a clearing of flat grass, like someone mowed this area. We weren't afraid or anything while we were there. There really wasn't anything remarkable about it. And that's honestly what makes it so weird to think about to this day. We just walked around it for a bit, said it was kind of weird, and we went back on our adventure. Eventually, we all just went home. I'm still friends with both of the other kids. We're in our 30s, and I'm even going to a wedding for one of them this weekend. We've talked about it since, and the story still just doesn't add up. My parents still live in that house, and we spent years after that day exploring the woods all the time. Never found it again.
Hearing this brings up a lot of nostalgia for me about exploring the woods with my friends when we were kids. And the house? Who knows? Secret government organization, or just a guy living in the woods off the grid.
My grandmother swears I saved by an angel at the beach when I was a baby. Obviously, I was way too young to remember, but the way the story goes is we were floating around in the ocean, and a wave knocked little 6-month-old me off of a raft and away from my grandma. She claimed she panicked, and that I was nowhere to be seen. But as she ran to the shore, a freakishly tall old man with wispy gray hair caught her and handed me over. After checking to see if I was okay, she turned to thank him, but says he had vanished completely. When I was a young man in my 20s, I would go camping by myself often. On this particular time, I had set up a tent in a small patch of grass not far from a creek. I was just walking to the creek with my pot to fill with water when I heard a strange squealing and went to investigate. I got to a steep bank, and halfway down, tangled in barbed wire, was a bear cub hanging by its neck and front leg, squealing loudly. I looked at the top of the tank, and the bank was the mother, and she was in distress, calling and grunting or chirping. It's the best way I can describe the sound. My eyes met with the mother's, and I was caught off guard. I looked at her and held my arms out, palms out, fingers pointed down. I somehow knew it would be okay to help the cub. I walked up to the bear cub and held it by the scruff of the neck with one hand and quickly unwrapped the wire with the other and set the cub on the ground and backed away. When I got far enough away to feel safe, I couldn't see the bears anymore because of the bend in the creek and the bushes. It was nearly dark, and I couldn't move my camp, so I just stayed the night. The next morning, as I was packing up my tent, a bear came from the creekside with a large fish in its mouth. It was about 40 feet from me before I noticed it. It looked at me, dropped the fish, grunted, and turned and walked away. About 2018-ish, our at-the-time roommate asked if we would drive her to the next town over to meet some dude. My wife and I were kind of apprehensive just due to some of the stuff this guy was saying, but we decided we'd go. She even convinced us to stay and watch a movie with them, so F it, we started driving. We decided to stop for gas on the way out, grab a drink for the road, but as we were coming around the corner to the gas station, we saw a woman in a white sundress, no shoes, just strolling down the side of the road. She was so close to the middle of the road that I swerved to miss her and then hammered on the brakes, got out, and went to check it if I had hit her. Nowhere to be found. No woman, no nothing, and there was nowhere she could have gone to the left or right. I checked under the car, nothing. We were all pretty rattled, but decided we'd keep going. As soon as we pulled into the gas station, the TPMS went off saying the 2 passenger side tires were flat. Sure enough, both valve stems had sheared off. We got the car towed, went home, called it a night. While later we found out the guy whose house we were supposed to go to got arrested after a search warrant was executed on the property and they found human remains. I still believe we were saved by the dark-haired woman in the sundress. My sister and I both saw the same or similar floating white figure out of the same window of the house 6 months apart without having discussed it till about 8 years after each witnessing it. Our eldest sister claimed to have seen the same thing in front of our house after we both came clean to her. There was about a year-long period when I would hear a phantom calling my name to the front yard, but there was no one or nothing out there when I'd look outside. My friends and I saw some interesting lights in the sky one night on my mom's deck. We live in the DC suburbs, so we were scoping it out with binoculars and a cheap telescope I had from when I was a kid. We were yelling at the sky, taunting it to come abduct us or being idiots when all of a sudden a black helicopter flies in our vicinity at what seemed like no more than 50 to 100 feet above my mom's house. It hovered and shined a few various lights down. It had green and red lights underneath. Stayed for about a minute observing us, then took off. I don't think the initial lights were anything more than satellites, even though they moved erratically enough to catch our attention, but our county has thousands of police officers. They wouldn't have sent a normal police chopper for some rowdy kids being somewhat loud in our backyard. The suddenness that the helicopter arrived and how low it got was unbelievable and stunned us for hours after. We suspected some kind of 3-letter agency was coming to document our acknowledgement of whatever we saw in the sky, and either scare us or record us. For reference, we live in the NRO CIA's backyard. Wild experience that left us wondering what the hell had happened. Had apparently a sleep hallucination, different from a night terror, and saw a black ichor monster with a crown made of flesh. It ran at me all herky-jerky when it noticed I was awake. I screamed and put the blanket over my head. My mom woke up and ran into the room. It was gone. Looked as real life, just a few feet from me. It was seamless with real life. 20 years later, and haven't experienced anything like that before or after. Mom later said she was and saw a moving shadow in the room before she turned out the light. I was on a pretty secluded beach one time, and it was boiling hot, 36 degrees Celsius or so. I was sitting in the shade when I noticed a weird figure by the water bending down. The figure looked like a person that was covered in very heavy clothing that would literally kill someone in this weather. I haven't seen this figure approach from anywhere, and from where I was sitting, I could see all sides of the beach. Anyway, I felt this horrible sense of dread, like something horrible is going to happen to me, but I literally blinked and it disappeared. Now, I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, even though I had some slightly creepy stuff happen in a couple of old places. I don't drink or take any meds or legal or otherwise, but maybe it was the heat that made me momentarily delirious? I have no idea. This was about 8 to 10 years ago. I was on my way to work for an early morning shift. To get to work, I had to drive down this long, dark road, which the speed limit was about 80 kilometers an hour. Now, on this road, there's a stretch for about 2 minutes where there's pure darkness, except for your headlights. While driving, I looked up and saw an orb of light directly above my car, which was traveling a bit quicker than me. Never seen anything like it. The light followed me for as long as 30 seconds, then shot to the side into the bushland. I was intrigued and wanted to follow it, but there was no road that leads toward it. It slowly disappeared into the trees. I've never told anyone except for my girlfriend this story, as I don't know what to make of it. So now I can explain this, but for the longest time I just accepted it as odd memory. I have this really strong memory of back when I was a young kid of looking out the rear side window of my family's car and seeing 2 moons in the sky above the coniferous treetops, just sitting there and glowing next to each other, both really bright and 2 separate spheres. I remember that we were driving up to Vermont at the time, so the sky was really dark. For the longest time I just thought of this as a weirdly strong memory, but didn't really understand it. Then I went back and looked up when the Hale-Bopp comet was in the sky. It was absolutely that. I then realized that I had a really cool memory of a stunning view of a full moon and the Hale-Bopp comet in the sky together. It was such a fantastic sight that it stuck with me as a strong memory for years without understanding it. Very cool. On a super dark road in farmland with corn on both sides, a weird human-shaped thing with wings was crouched in the road, and it did a weird jump and took off flying above the corn. Every one of the cars screamed like lunatics. We were on the way to a party, and everyone there thought we were messing with them, but We were legitimately terrified. It was big, like the size of an average man. This was over 10 years ago, and we still randomly message each other about it. Saw a friendly-looking cat that I didn't recognize coming up to me, like it was looking for attention, in the hallway of my house. Right when it got close, it disappeared. Years later, I got a kitten, which grew into a cat that reminded me of that cat. My older brother and I were probably 10 and 13 at the time this happened. We used to watch the History Channel and saw the shows about UFOs and whatnot. People talking about seeing actual triangles just floating in the sky with no sound. My brother and I watched them just to poke fun at the witnesses because we thought it was so far-fetched and ridiculous. One night, just after sundown, we were outside feeding our dogs. My brother looks up and notices something in the sky. I look up with him and I'll be damned, a hovering triangular object making no noise was hovering over our heads. What made it so eerie was that it was hovering not much higher than the tree tops, but still no noise. My brother shined the flashlight at it, which scared me even more. We instantly ran inside and told our parents, but of course, they're not going to believe the kids, and honestly, I don't blame them. Ever since that night, I've always looked up in the sky, hoping to see something like it again, but I have yet to. I'll never forget it. One night when I was a kid, my friend and I saw some guy get out of his pickup and throw several large full trash bags into the woods across the street from my house. We figured it was leaves he'd collected from his yard. The next morning we went to get the bags, thinking we'd dump the leaves in the woods and throw the bags away, but there was nothing there. When I was at a chess tournament as a kid, I would always hang out with this one kid. My dad was friends with his dad. All was good until one day. When we were walking out to the parking lot after a tournament, we were talking and laughing. My family was to the left side of them, and him and his dad were to the right side of us. The distance was a couple of meters from each other. I remember looking at them, looking the other way for a split second, and then looking back at them just to see that they had vanished. It may sound weird, but they actually vanished. My family was flabbergasted. My dad even went up the stairs to quickly search the building for them. No sign at all. To this day, that mystery has become unexplained. I never saw them after that. There's evidence that they have existed, though, as there's a picture of that same kid in the academy where I used to go as a kid. Creeps me out every time. This goes along with the other stories, but this is the one that sticks out. When I was probably 11, I was at home with my mom and dad. The way our house was set up, the office opened into the living room from a very wide door, and the kitchen was next to the living room, fairly open concept. I was in the office on my computer. My dad was on the couch watching TV. We were probably 10 feet apart at most, within view of one another. It was like 7 at night, and it was pretty much totally dark out. What we saw I can only describe as the most intense camera flash you could imagine. Think about how lightning lights up the dark sky so much it looks like daylight for a second. It was that, but indoors. It wasn't lightning outside. The sky was clear, and somehow you could just tell it originated inside. Dad and I looked at each other. We both saw the same thing, and we both sat there a little freaked out. We've talked about it dozens of times, and our stories are still identical, but we can't figure it out. Dad and I both saw it. One big flash, just as quick as a camera flash, completely overtook both rooms. I'm breaking the rules because I only heard this, but it's spooky and true. My parents would leave for work an hour before my bus came, so I got an hour to watch cartoons. I loved it. One morning I heard the distinct click of the basement door closing, so I assumed someone got in a basement window and thought nobody was home. I screamed out, "I haven't seen you, please don't hurt me. I'll leave right now and I promise I won't tell anyone," and ran out the front door with my backpack. We lived in a rural area and had a long driveway, but I heard plates and glasses shattering because it was May and the kitchen window was partly open. That was a long wait for my bus, lol. I didn't tell anyone, and when I got home, nothing was broken or missing. It had never occurred to me to be scared of being home alone in the morning, so there was no real reason I'd convinced myself I heard something. But that basement door had a very loud click that echoed up the stairs, and it's hard to mistake other sounds for glasses and plates being thrown on the ground. My mom died of cancer 2 years ago. I was with her on her deathbed for her final week as she was in and out of consciousness. I had to give her morphine. She stopped talking a couple days before she died, but at some point in the ordeal, she became totally lucid and started talking about our old neighbor who died back in the late 90s. I grew up in somewhat rural Ohio. The guy she was talking about was this classic old guy who would drive around to the neighbors at his old Ford tractor, talk loud, drink whiskey, and chew tobacco. She told me he was in the room bothering her. I started recording what she was saying and started asking her questions. This was the last time I talked to her. A week later, before the funeral, I was trying to sort some of my files on my computer and get my shit in order to give a speech. I had the files of recordings from that week, but I somehow deleted them, and somehow also deleted them from the recycle bin. I have no idea how it happened, and I sort of flipped out, because it was our last conversation. If you know me, I'm very meticulous, organized with my stuff, and never lose files or anything really. I'm not really religious, but my mom is. It was like I recorded something I wasn't supposed to have. And something from that spirit realm. It was trippy. Even as I write this, it freaks me out. I wonder if anyone else had a similar experience. My father's story. He doesn't like to tell it, but it's my favorite creepy story. We are all big into hunting in Kentucky with the men of the family. Dad, 20 at the time, along with grandpa, uncle, and one great uncle. They find some wooded farmland to hunt on, and they go out there with a small camper with 4 bunk beds the night before. Before daybreak, 4:50 a.m., they go into the woods where they all had 12-foot tall deer stands to climb up and hunt on mounted at several different locations. By 9 a.m., nobody had fired a shot, so everyone is walking back to the camp to make breakfast, except for Dad. They figured he might have female deer called does in close proximity to his stand, and he didn't want to scare them away in case a big buck was nearby looking to mate. The men eat and then go back out in the early afternoon until dark. After dark, they meet back up for dinner and a campfire, still no sight or sound from Dad. 11 p.m., and alarmed that something is wrong, the guys go out and search for him, fearing he may have gotten lost in the woods. They find him in his deer stand, scared shitless, sitting quietly. During his morning hunt, he saw what appeared to be a 9 to 10 foot tall animal walking on 2 legs covered in brown hair. It walked within 100 yards of him. He had view of it for almost 2 minutes. Dad didn't believe in any Bigfoot legend, but he figured he'd be safer hiding up in the tree than on the ground trying to get out of the woods, when that thing could still be in the area. He waited in that deer stand for 16 hours until help came, with more guys and more guns. DR. Dad saw Bigfoot while hunting. Scared him so bad he froze where he was in the forest for 16 hours until other men of the family came to search and rescue him. During hunting season, my mom, Dad, and I were driving around some back roads near our house looking for deer in the fields. It was getting dark, but just light enough that we could see the fields. By this time, the corn was still waiting to be harvested, so it was as tall as it could be. The road that was on a slight incline from the cornfield, so we could see over it. About 400 yards in, something was standing in the field, but we just thought it was the farmer out there without a flashlight. We figured after a bit that it must be a scarecrow or something that the farmer put up recently, because he would not be standing 2 to 3 feet above the corn without a flashlight at dusk. We started driving off after a bit, but while we were driving, my dad kept watching it. He yelled at my mom to turn the truck around because he saw the effing thing bent over. I looked back and caught it standing back up. She found a driveway nearby about a minute later, but by the time we got back, it had vanished. My best guess is that it was a large-ass black bear standing up, but that had to have been one big effing bear. DR. Something standing in a mature cornfield with a height 2 to 3 feet above the field bent over and stood back up. I swear to Christ, my childhood or current home has gnomes. When I was 13 or so, I lost my wallet, a super cool Vans one with a chain and everything, peak style for the new millennium, along with the $30 and middle school ID that were inside it. My dad and I searched for 3 days and turned up nothing. Freshman year of college, the first morning I was home for winter break, I come downstairs. Right there on the goddamn coffee table was my wallet, $30, middle school ID and all. I asked my dad where he found it. He had no idea what I was talking about. If my dad is messing with me, it would be so heinously out of character, I'd literally be worried about his mental health. That kind of screwing around just isn't his style, so I genuinely believe him. But I have no effing clue what happened. We've never hired a cleaning service and hadn't had many guests for months beforehand, but I have no effing clue what did happen then. And that's not all. I'm living in the same house now, and just a few months ago, while I was living alone, I woke up one morning to find that my glasses were goddamn nowhere. Not in the usual spot or on the windowsill.
Not in the usual wrong spots where I toss them haphazardly when I'm sleepy or lazy, not on the floor. After a few hours of searching, I gave up and wore my spare pair for the day. They're an old prescription, but they work well enough, and after failing to find my regular glasses again on day 2, I honestly totally forgot about them. Until after about a month, I started to get headaches from the wrong prescription. I figured what it was and was quick enough, and started tearing my room up looking for, moved the bed, moved out the bookshelf, went through all my drawers, no stone unturned. After a few hours, I stood in the wreckage of my bedroom, surrounded by clothes, out of breath and frustrated, and then I saw them, on the windowsill, right where I always put them, right where I not only looked several times, but literally ran my hand along, as if they'd been invisible, or something.